Hi, everybody. It's Eric Murray from thesugarhuddle.com. Every week I do my college football pick six predictions where I pick six of the top college football games and do the betting lines and pick a overall winner as well as a spread winner. Sometimes it's not always the same team. Anyways, we're entering week 9, deep into the college football season. Some really good games coming up. A lot of games that could decide divisions and conferences even. Got some really good ranked matchups this week. And by the way, last few weeks I haven't done so great. I was 2-4 against spread, 2-4 against as far as overall winners last week. On the year, I'm 17-25 against the spread, 19-23 as far as overall winners. But maybe I'll bounce back this week. Maybe I won't. I don't know. I'm better at picking NFL games, but what the hell? Just listen to my picks and see what you think. But anyways, the 6 games in order: number 9, Florida, at number 7, Georgia. Of course, world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Georgia won that game big last year. I don't think it's going to be the case this year. But anyways, they're a 1-point favorite. My adjusted line, they'd be 1.5. I actually have them winning 31-16. So I have them covering and winning that game. My second game, number 18, Iowa, at number 17, Penn State. Penn State at home, 6-point favorite. My adjusted line, 6.5. But I have Iowa covering and winning 24-17. Number 21, South Florida, goes on the road to Houston. Houston's actually a 7.5-point favorite at home. I have Houston winning, but I have South Florida covering. So, anyways, Houston wins 37-31. South Florida covers. Number 4 of my pick 6 games, I've got number 14, Washington State, coming off that big win against Oregon. They're at number 24, Stanford. Stanford at home is a 2.5-point favorite. And then the Saturday night game on ABC, number 6, Texas, is at unranked Oklahoma State. Texas on the road, they're 3-point favorite, which makes it 3.5 after my adjusted line. And then finally, there's a noon Big Ten game, which rounds out my pick 6, Purdue at Michigan State. Both teams have been kind of interesting lately. Michigan State is actually the favorite in this one. 1-point favorite, my adjusted line, 1.5. So anyways, I have Stanford winning 35-27, so I have them covering and winning. Texas covering and winning easily 41-17. And then finally, in the 6th game, believe it or not, I'm actually going to take Michigan State to win 23-21. It's a tough pick, but we'll see what happens. And I'll get to why I kind of think that maybe Michigan State could get it done. First of all, as far as the Georgia-Florida game, Florida's a team, they're averaging up around 35 points, 34.4 points per game. But, both teams come in this game 6-1, obviously. But, they've kind of struggled to get to these points the last few weeks. They end up scoring 27 and winning against LSU, but that was mainly fourth quarter scoring, defensive struggle there. They were down 21-3 at one point against Vanderbilt and ended up winning 37-27. Vanderbilt's obviously Vanderbilt. And of course, before the LSU win, they beat Mississippi State in a real defensive struggle. I think it was 13-7. So even though on paper they're averaging, basically we'll just round up and call it 5 touchdowns a game, the reality is, they struggle. They really kind of get off to a slow start, and as badly as Georgia was 2 weeks ago against LSU, losing 36-16, Georgia, I think if they can get off to a quick start, they can definitely pull ahead and get this double-digit win like I have them doing. This game's going to essentially decide the SEC East, in my opinion. So it's a must-win for both teams, not just because of how fierce of a rivalry it is, obviously, in Jacksonville every single year. Georgia themselves, 39 points per game. Certainly a lot of similarities with both teams. With Georgia, they have 2 really amazing running backs in Elijah Holyfield and DeAndre Swift. Collectively, they have 850 rushing yards on over 6 yards a carry. With Florida, you have 3 running backs that all have at least 295 rushing yards: Jordan Scarlett, LaMichael Pirine, and Dameon Pierce. And you've got 2 quarterbacks that can both be pretty good, but can be both just average a lot of times. Felipe Franks, 15 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, but he's only completing like 56.6% of his passes, 56.6%. Jake Fromm, much better completion percentage, but he's a guy who's barely averaging 200 yards per game passing, 13 touchdowns, 4 picks. Had a couple picks against LSU. He's a guy, he held the ball just a little bit too long, a little bit indecisive against LSU's defense. Can't do that against Florida's defense. Florida's defense, pretty opportunistic, 7 interceptions, and opposing quarterbacks have a rating of just 99.82, which is very, very low in college football. But nonetheless, I just like Georgia a lot in this one because, again, Florida's offense just getting off to too many slow starts. I think Georgia, remember they had a bye after the LSU loss, so they're pretty well rested, and I think they're pretty determined to bounce back and get this win, knowing that they could still go on a run, they could still win the SEC East, they could still win the SEC championship and be in the college football playoff again, and have a shot to get back to the national title game. So I think this is kind of their road to redemption starting this week. And I just like them over Florida because, again, I think Florida will get off to a little bit too slow of a start offensively, and I think that could put them in a little bit of a hole. And then, of course, the second game with Penn State and Iowa. Iowa, obviously, always a very tough and physical team. Really like Nate Stanley a lot. I mean, he's a guy, 6'4", 242, kind of an intriguing NFL prospect. A lot better than their previous NFL guy, who, of course, is C.J. Beathard now with the Niners. And Beathard ended up getting overdrafted a little bit a couple years ago. So, Stanley's an intriguing quarterback. He had 26 touchdowns, 6 picks last year, including that 5-touchdown game against Ohio State. This year he has 16 and 6. I think the impressive thing, though, with him is last year he only completed 55.6% of his passes, which was like C.J. Beathard territory, 61% this year. So that's really impressive. Ground game, 165 yards per game, which is fairly decent. I think the thing that's kind of interesting is, the time of possession, 33 minutes and 34 seconds. They average 49% on third downs. Defensively, they allow opponents 36.78%, 0% on fourth downs. The opponents have tried 7 times. They allow 14 points per game. They have 9 interceptions, three different players with 2 apiece. 6 players have 30-plus tackles, so they really love to swarm to the football. And then, of course, going back to the offense, they're 10 of 15 themselves on fourth down conversions, so 2/3. But the reason why I throw out some of these numbers is because, Penn State, they're a team that they've got Miles Sanders, who's a heck of a running back. Trace McSorley's had a tremendous year running the football as well. Between the two of them, they have 1,326 rushing yards and 16 touchdowns. Sanders, 772 yards and 8 touchdowns. McSorley, 554 and 8. But the thing about it is, they also are under 37% on third downs offensively, and they're going up against a team that allows less than 37% defensively, and then they're just 40% on fourth downs. And I think another thing too is, you look at McSorley, yeah, he's got all the rushing yards, and yeah, they average 240 rushing yards per game, but he's only completing 53.9% of his passes. Every single week, it's been kind of a struggle. You look at the Michigan State loss, you look at the Ohio State loss the week before that. Just very, very average quarterback play. And that's what I felt coming into the season, that Penn State was going to take a step back because of the fact that they lost Saquon Barkley, who was such a big part of their offense. And I thought he kind of protected McSorley a lot. McSorley could, had his moments with Barkley, but I kind of felt like Barkley really kind of protected McSorley a lot. And it feels like now McSorley has to put it in the air more at times, and he's showing he's just too inconsistent, and he can make some big plays down the stretch in games, but for 4 quarters, he can't really put a team on his back consistently. And again, that's why you have a lot of the issues you have as far as his accuracy. Only has 3 interceptions, but he's just not doing enough in the passing game. And, there's going to be weeks where he's not going to do a whole lot running the ball. So, yeah, I just think Iowa's a better team right now. Iowa's 6-1, Penn State 5-2. But Penn State, they had the back-to-back losses, and then they almost blew it against Indiana, barely won that game, 33-28 last week. So Penn State, they're a team that I wasn't really buying them coming into the season, and they're showing, they're just showing that down the stretch in games, fourth quarter, their defense all of a sudden becomes really terrible. Offensively, again, McSorley can only do so much. Yeah, again, with the rushing yards, but still, late game situations, there's going to be times where you're going to have to throw it. And, you can't depend on the same type of running plays over and over again. And that's, been a thing it's really cost them as of late, is just not being able to make enough big plays in the passing game late in games. And, of course, the defense not making any stops at all late in these games, which has really been tough. They only have 2 receivers with over 20 catches, KJ Hamler and Juwan Johnson. Hamler's numbers are pretty good, 22 for 401 and 5 scores. Johnson, though, 21, 293 and a score, so he's not really doing a whole lot. But I just like Iowa better. I just think they're a more physical team. The defense, the way they can swarm to the football, I think they'll do a pretty good job of holding Penn State in check on the ground game. And I think Stanley is just going to outduel McSorley. So I think that's just kind of the big difference. I think Stanley's just a better quarterback, and I just think they have a better defense. And I think that's enough that Iowa's going to get the win. Still going to be a pretty good game. And then, of course, South Florida, Charlie Strong going against Major Applewhite and Houston. Houston, again, at home, 7.5-point favorite. I have them winning, but I don't have them covering the spread. It's kind of interesting because South Florida, they have 4 wins by 8 points or less. They had that walk-off a few weeks back against Tulsa, game-winning field where they won by 1. Houston, on the other hand, they score a lot of points. They don't play a whole lot of defense. Not a whole lot worse than South Florida. South Florida, 35.6 points per game offensively. They allow 25.7 defensively. Whereas Houston, for not playing a whole lot of defense, they allow 29.1. They score 48.7. Of course, D'Eriq King, who now their second full year as a quarterback, former receiver, he's really been outstanding this year. He continues to get better. Already has just under 2,000 passing yards, 1,984, 23 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 170 rating. He's going against Blake Barnett, the one-time Alabama quarterback, 10 touchdowns, 7 picks, 259 yards per game. So, if South Florida, like a lot of teams, shows that they can't slow down or stop Houston's offense, that means that it's going to be in Blake Barnett's hands. And, I don't know if Barnett can really keep pace and can, just like with the Penn State game that I mentioned with Stanley and McSorley, I don't think McSorley can outduel Stanley. I don't think Felipe Franks can outduel Jake Fromm. And I don't really think Blake Barnett's going to outduel D'Eriq King. And King obviously, has the running ability too. So, and Barnett has 7 interceptions, like I said. So, I think the big thing for South Florida, Jordan Cronkite, third in the nation rushing, 110 carries, 860 yards, 7.8 yards per carry. So if you're Houston, you allow 149 rushing yards per game. So you're not terrible stopping the run, but you're not great. You allow 333.6 per game passing. So almost 500 yards per game total. But again, Barnett, 259. So it's going to be really kind of an interesting contrast because Houston has does enough things stopping the run. Obviously, you got guys like Ed Oliver, but then stopping the pass, it's non-existent. And you're going against a guy who's a decent passer, but not great. So it's going to be kind of an interesting matchup there. They've got some really good receivers. Marquez Stevenson, 40 catches, 613 yards, 6 touchdowns. They got another guy who has 7 touchdowns. So, South Florida, 7-0. Charlie Strong doing a great job there, but I just don't think it's going to be enough. I just think there's a reason why Houston at home facing this undefeated ranked team is still a 7.5-point favorite. And again, I think Houston won't cover the spread, but I think they'll do enough to get the win. I just think there's too much offense for South Florida to handle. South Florida hasn't had a real difficult schedule to this point, and this is arguably the toughest team they faced, definitely the toughest offense they faced. So I just like Houston a little bit better. Washington State and Stanford, it's a tough one because Stanford, they can't run the ball. They're averaging 91.5 rushing yards per game, 127th out of 130 teams. That's definitely not Stanford football. You're used to them averaging about 200 yards per game, not less than 100. So that's tough. And then, their ground game is allowing 152. They allow over 400 yards a game. So their defense is really falling apart. Bryce Love probably regrets a little bit coming back to school. He only has 348 yards, 4 yards a carry. But, with that being said, they're at home. Washington State's coming off of such an emotional win over Oregon State. Remember in that game, they almost blew it. They were up 27-0 at the half. They did everything right against Oregon, completely shut down Justin Herbert, which is something that Stanford didn't do, even though they, of course, end up beating Oregon at Oregon in overtime. But they were up 27-0, and all of a sudden, fourth quarter, it's 27-20, and Washington State had to finally put together one last drive late in the fourth quarter to seal the victory, but defense really started to fall apart. Washington State, obviously, like we're used to seeing with Mike. What the heck's his name? I can't think of his name off the top of my head. But anyways, Mike Leach. Yeah, Mike Leach's teams. Tons of passing, not a whole lot of rushing. 72% pass versus run, which leads the nation in most, percentage passing. So that, of course, if you're Stanford, how do you stop a short passing game when your secondary gives up over 250 yards per game? And I think a big part of it is going to be time of possession because, Stanford isn't really running the ball. KJ Costello is hit or miss in a lot of ways, but, Washington State, again, coming off an emotional win, I just wonder, even with the down year that Stanford's having, that I still think that Stanford's going to find a way to show that, Washington State, you haven't seen this type of physicality this much this year. We're going to bring it to you. And again, you're coming to Palo Alto to face us. So I just think in that regard, again, with Washington State coming off of such a big win, I think Stanford's going to find a way to come out and run the ball a heck of a lot better than they typically do. I think they'll have 150 plus rushing yards on the ground. I think KJ Costello will have one of his better games of the year. I think he'll do enough against this Washington State team to, have the time possession battle in their favor, maybe like 33 minutes to Washington State's 27 minutes. And I think defensively, I think Stanford will do just enough to make sure that Washington State doesn't pick them apart the way they picked apart Oregon. Because Stanford, I think, still has a little bit of a better defense than Oregon. So, and remember, too, Stanford, I think a big thing, too, with Stanford is they're battle-tested. They got killed against Notre Dame after being such a tight game into the third quarter. And then the next week they got beat up by Utah. But those are two very good, very physical football teams. And that's something that makes them a very battle-tested team that Washington State hasn't seen a ton of because Oregon's not an overly physical team. So I think that could be another big factor. And so that's why I like Stanford to get the upset there. Even though they're the favorite, it's still an upset. And then Texas-Oklahoma State, just simply put, I just don't think Oklahoma State's that great of a team. They've lost 3 out of 4 now, back-to-back losses. Got killed by Kansas State, 31-12. That was 2 weeks ago. So they did have a bye to try to rebound, recover, but still, just not really. Taylor Cornelius, 8 interceptions. Defensively, they lead the Big 12 with 30 sacks, and yet they're giving up 28.4 points per game, which is kind of typical. Oklahoma State, a lot of offense, not a whole lot of defense. The Oklahoma State opponents average 33 minutes and 24 seconds time of possession per game. And part of that, too, is because Oklahoma State, they average almost 40 points per game. They score pretty quickly, and that's how their offense operates. But that can really come back to bite them in a game like this because Texas, time of possession is almost identical to that, 32-43. They're a team that's not afraid to slow it down. I think the thing that's going to be interesting about this game is the fact that Sam Ehlinger, he sprained his AC joint in a narrow victory against Baylor a couple weeks, or actually, that was 2 weeks ago because Texas had a bye as well. And supposedly he's going to start this game. Shane Buechele, he'll be ready to go. But I think regardless of if it's Ehlinger, if it's Buechele, I think either one can beat up on Oklahoma State. Because Oklahoma State, again, not a whole lot of defense. And I just, they've got Justice Hill, who's one of the better running backs in the country, 684 yards and 7 touchdowns right now. But he's going against the Texas defense that only allows 126 yards per game. So I'm pretty confident that the Texas D-line will win the battle up front with the OSU O-line. And then on the other side of it, you think about Lil Jordan Humphrey and Colin Johnson. That's probably the best receiver tandem in Big 12. Both of them have over 500 yards receiving, 9 combined touchdowns, over 40 catches apiece. So if you're Oklahoma State, how are you going to stop that? I think Ehlinger, if he's healthy enough to play the whole game, he'll be effective enough. He'll get the ball to those two guys. I don't think OSU has anybody who can stop those guys. And again, they give up a whole lot of points. And again, I just don't think Justice Hill is going to run wild like he has in previous games. I think, again, when you're facing a D line like Texas, it's going to be tough. Now, I think there's still a lot of people that aren't sold on Texas, myself included. And this game isn't really going to, unless they lose, this game isn't really going to validate them too much because Oklahoma State's not that great of a team. But it definitely is a nice win and gets them one step closer to where they want to be. But I like Texas to win this one big 41-17. And some people will definitely feel better about Texas after this game if they do win by that kind of score. And then finally, Purdue, Michigan State, both teams 4-3. Different paths to get to the 4-3, of course, because in Purdue's case, they've won 4 straight after an 0-3 start. Michigan State, it's kind of like win every other week, lose every other week. That's kind of how it's been for them. Michigan State, they lost 21-7 to Michigan at home last week. And, in that game, the only reason why they even got a single touchdown is because of Michigan turnover. Of course, when all the rain started to fall, both sides couldn't hold on to the football, and it was kind of a turnover fest for a little while there. Then Michigan State gave up the big touchdown pass, Donovan Peoples-Jones, and that kind of put it away. But, nonetheless, Michigan State, they've gotten shredded the last couple of weeks, stopping the run, 388 yards combined for Penn State and Michigan in those two games. So Michigan State went from giving up like 40 rushing yards a game to now giving up 80. And, Brian Lewerke, he had a couple 300-plus yard games in a row there. And then this past week, he just wasn't good at all. And the flip side of that, Purdue, huge home victory over then number 2 Ohio State, 49-20, killed them. David Blau, who's been their starting quarterback for quite some time now, has really done a nice job bouncing back this year. 66.5% completion percentage, 2,073 yards, averages 9 yards attempt, whereas Lewerke only averages 6 yards per attempt. And, Blau, he had 378 yards, 3 touchdowns against Ohio State. The Purdue running game had 161 yards and 3 touchdowns against Ohio State. But the main thing was in the second half, they broke a couple of big runs, and that really was all she wrote in a big blowout, which was a pretty close back and forth game for quite some time there. DJ Knox, he was a big part of that, 668 rushing yards, 8 touchdowns, 6.5 yards to carry. And then through the air, Rondale Moore, 57 catches, 728 yards, and 7 touchdowns. So you kind of ask yourself, okay, how does Michigan State keep this close? How does Michigan State, regardless of where the game's being played, how do they find a way to win this football game? And I think this is yet another game where you have one team that's, even though they're on a roll right now, they're well coached, you have one team that's coming off of such an emotional win. And of course, there's a whole story with the cancer patient that was hoping for the win. I think his name was Tyler Trent, with the Purdue beating Ohio State. So it was a very emotional atmosphere for Purdue at home against Ohio State last week. And now, going on the road to East Lansing, noon game, Michigan State not looking that great right now. So I think from, Purdue's point of view, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, you know what, we just came off this big win. Now it's like this is kind of like a hangover game for them. So I just think that's going to be the main thing, is the hangover factor. If Purdue doesn't come in hungover, then yeah, they should beat Michigan State by a couple touchdowns. But I kind of have a feeling there's be a hangover factor. Michigan State is such a Jekyll and Hyde football team from week to week. 1 week they can look pretty darn good, the next they don't look very good. The way they play against Northwestern and lost. Then they look real good against Penn State and drove down the field and won at the end of the game. Even though it was 7-7 for a long time against Michigan, they couldn't do anything offensively, and Michigan was clearly the better team. So I guess this week you could say they're due to have a pretty decent week, and I think Lewerke will have a 300-yard passing game, and I think he'll drive them down the field late, and they'll kick a field goal, and they'll win 23-21. So that's a pick that I can't say I'm super confident in, but nonetheless, I still think that there's a strong possibility that Michigan State can pull that game off. So we'll see. But anyways, those are my college football pick 6 picks for the week. Look for my follow-up video probably tomorrow. And anyways, go to sugarhuddle.com, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and also on Facebook, the Sugar Huddle page. Thank you.